Uhuru, and welcome to the Crisis Report. My name is Penny Hess, and I want to talk to you about some of the most important issues and questions of our time. This program is called the Crisis Report because of this book, the understandings in this book called The Uneasy Equilibrium, The African Revolution versus Parasitic Capitalism by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who leads the Uhuru movement, who's the chair of the African People's Socialist Party. And he defines the equilibrium, the uneasy equilibrium, which means the balance of power between the past and the future, between the haves and the have-nots, between the colonized and the colonizer. That this is what determines the crisis of imperialism and of the world that we see today. That is very exciting and very, very important to be able to understand this, to see the world through the eyes of the African working class. And this is what I want to talk to you about, because I want to discuss this as a white person, to you as a white person, about how we go about building a principled relationship to African people and the majority of humanity. And if we look at the headlines today, we can see the question of race dominates the headlines, whether we're talking about that fizzled out white nationalist demonstration in Washington, D.C. this past weekend, or more importantly, whether we're talking about the incredible resistance that has followed the police murders and white nationalist murders of mostly young African people, but African people of all ages here inside this country, like Mike Brown, Freddie Gray, Oscar Grant, so many cases, Neil Wilson in California recently, so many cases here and all over this country, that we see this resistance, this amazing and powerful, exuberant resistance of African people standing up and fighting to be free, to be liberated, to end this violence against them. And we see this question of race, it always permeates everything in the United States and in the world, not just under Trump, but under Obama too. The oppression of African people is the DNA of this system, of the United States, of capitalism, of imperialism in this world today. It was born on the assault on Africa. It was born on kidnapping African people and turning them into commodities for sale. It was this that created the first stock markets, the entire infrastructure of the economy of the capitalist world. This is what created opportunity, democracy, quote unquote, the ability of white people to come here to the United States from Europe and walk up the ladder of success based on participating in the violence, holding down, oppressing, and terrorizing African people, forcing to steal their labor day after day for hundreds of years, for half a millennium and more, that this has been going on, and that we have a history. We have to look at it. We have participated in slavery and genocide. And this is what we want to talk about, because I believe that perhaps, maybe the majority of white people in this country, maybe in other places where white people are, I'm not sure, but I think that maybe in this country, in Europe, want to do the right thing when it comes to African people. But many of us don't know how, and that's what we want to talk about. I don't believe that we have to be separated from everybody else. Chairman Omali Yeshitela says that white people have self-imposed isolation from the planet Earth based on sitting on this pedestal where we have the highest standard of living in the world. And as he has said, we're tied to our stomachs and pocketbooks. We get into a drug-induced stupor based on the material life that we are pursuing, but based on the day-to-day going to work and paying the bills and paying the mortgage and getting a new car and all of the things that are part of the life, going on vacation, having enough money to put our children through college. This is the life that white people live. And it is vastly different from the conditions that not only that oppressed and colonized peoples live in every place else in the world, but it's vastly contrary to the conditions that African, indigenous, Mexican people, Puerto Rican people live in, inside the borders of the United States. And I do believe that we can change. I believe that we can overcome this historic, this infamous arrogance and self-centeredness as white people. But I don't think that we can do that easily. And I don't think that we can do that without going through a lot of changes. We have to look at reality, we have to take responsibility, and we have to get to work to change the world. Now, how do we do that? Well, I want to say, first of all, that any ideas that I express on this program or anyplace else do not come from me. I did not think of this. I could never have come to some of the conclusions that I fully understand and realize are very true today. They come from the leadership and from the political analysis of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and from the organized African working class. And embracing what the chairman calls the science of African internationalism is something that has changed my life. It is really, wow, it has opened up so much to begin to see the world, to begin to see my place in it, to begin to see how I can join in unity with the great historic movements of African colonized and oppressed peoples to be free and liberated and end this most violent system that has ever been the scourge on the face of the earth before. So we do that under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. And I just want to say that the African People's Socialist Party is an organization that understands that African people, black people, wherever they are located, whether in South America, in Brazil, in the Caribbean, any place in the United States, increasingly in Europe, or any place else in the world, are African people who have been forcibly dispersed around the world to build this system of parasitic capitalism, to steal their resources, their labor, their land, their genius, and everything about them. And the African People's Socialist Party has created the African People's Solidarity Committee, of which I am the chair. And there are many of us all over the country. We are building. There's also a Uhuru Solidarity Movement, which is a mass organization that's growing everywhere, even in Australia, and salute to comrades in Australia today, you know, that we are part of, that we as white people are part of. We're part of the strategy for African liberation. We have the mandate to go into the belly of the beast, to be the voice of black power in white face, and to call on white people to look at this reality and to take a stand of reparations to African people, because the stolen resources must go back to them. So what I want to do in this first report is to look at some of the things that the Chairman Omali Yeshitela, has written in his book that was published in 2014 called The Uneasy Equilibrium, and just to discuss it with you a little bit, because it challenges a lot. And it really challenges the question of racism and opens up a whole new way of looking at this issue. So I would like to go through that and talk about it. So the chairman says in chapter 3, it's called The Theory of African Internationalism. The chairman writes, "The science of African internationalism enabled our party," that's the African People's Socialist Party, "to avoid the ideological pitfalls that validate the assumption of the superiority of white people." So in other words, Chairman Omali Yeshitela thinks outside of the box. Anything that we take to be true, because this system tells us that on the news, in movies, films, books, school, churches, everything, that we're inundated by the viewpoint of white power. The chairman is challenging it, and he is bringing into focus the viewpoint, the experience, and the ideas of the African working class and impoverished. So basically, he's turning the world not upside down, but right side up. He's turning it to the side of the people. So, excuse me, the chairman says, thus, we have never been diverted from our mission of capturing power and uniting Africa and our nation under the leadership of the African working class. So he says it right there, that their struggle is not about racism or the ideological pitfalls that validate the assumption of the superiority of white people, which the concept of racism does. But that they're simply the struggle for power. They want power over their lives. They want self-government. They want to be the subjects of their own narrative. They want to tell their own story as they see it. They want to have control over the lives of their people to make sure that no white person with the ideas of racism in their heads can ever hurt them again because they have state power over their lives. This is what the chairman's talking about here. So the chairman says, with African internationalism, we can understand the material forces at work in the movement today, in the movement of history. We can clearly see the current shift in the balance of power between the oppressor and the oppressed, between Europe and the rest of us, between the white man, or I would add white woman, and the black man, or black woman. We determined long ago that characterizing our movement as a struggle against racism was a self-defeating waste of time. Wow. So this is a movement. The African People's Socialist Party has been in existence for nearly 50 years. Chairman Omali Yeshitela has been leading it since the early 1970s, since 1972, and they have never struggled against racism. That is powerful. They've struggled to understand the material forces at work in the movement of history. Not some king, not some white person that's supposed to be the brilliant leader, but in the masses of the people that have changed history and that will be responsible for creating a future in which all human beings can live. So the chairman says, what is called racism is simply the ideological foundation of capitalist imperialism. So it is an ideology. Racism is a concept that denies Africans our national identity and dignity, rather than defining the system of our oppression. So he's saying, basically, that then African people, if you want to say it this way, are in a racist way defined as a race. Nobody else is defined as a race. Everybody else is a nation. Everybody else is a nation, but African people are defined as a race. And he's saying that that is an ideological concept. So he's saying, again, racism is a concept that denies Africans our national identity and dignity rather than defining the system of our oppression. So we don't know what happened. We think, well, if white people would be nicer to Africans, the world would change. No, it would not. If we ended police brutality today, it still doesn't end, because African people live under a system of political and economic oppression that's called colonialism, and we're going to talk about that more. So the chairman says that the question of racism relegates African people to the Sisyphean task of winning acceptance from and often becoming one with their oppressors. With African internationalism, we have proven that race is simply a colonial invention originating from the enslavement and colonization of Africans and Africa that gave birth to capitalism and simultaneously the European nation. The chairman says, our struggle has always been for power, not against racism. To the extent that we win power, the, quote, racism of others becomes irrelevant. Power is the great equalizer, the fundamental aphrodisiac that is capable of turning a racist of today into a fawning sycophant of tomorrow. I think that's pretty clear. They want power over their lives. They do not care about the question of racism. And the chairman makes it really clear that this is not an innocent issue of semantics. The way this is understood informs our practice. The struggle against racism presupposes one approach, and the struggle against imperialist colonialism another. So let's talk about that, because what does that mean? If we believe that it's racism, we mean that, oh, well, we as white people have to spend hundreds of dollars going to diversity training or unlearning racism sessions, and then we can come back. We come back to the same conditions that we live in every day, and African people face the same conditions that they live in every day. They live under two Americas, that there are two worlds, there are two realities in this country, and that's defined by the question of colonialism, the same thing that we say about oppressed peoples all around the world, that they live under political and economic domination by an oppressor nation, and that's us. That's us as white people. So if we just talk about racism, then it means that we have to perfect this system. If we talk about colonialism, it brings us to the conclusion that African people and oppressed people inside the borders of the United States are going to struggle for their land, their independence, their self-determination, and their self-government, and the return of their stolen resources. That's a whole different struggle. And I totally unite with this. This is so clear. It is so liberating to me. And I feel that to everybody else who can open their eyes to this reality. So the chairman says, Africans are not a race, but a nation of people forcibly dispersed across the globe. We have been pushed out of history by our imperialist oppressors, partially through the concept of race. Our national homeland has been occupied in various ways for millennia. Our people have been captured and shipped around the world as capitalist commodities. Our labor and land have been violently extracted to build the European nation and the international capitalist system. This is what determines our reality and the contours of the struggle in which we have engaged for more than 500 years. So the chairman brings it down to the material reality of how the conditions of African people that are facing not only the United States, but all around the world, how they came about. The material conditions Africans suffer worldwide have their origin in the attack on Africa that led to the capture of our national homeland and our people. Our poverty and susceptibility to ignorance, violence, and material want throughout the world, including in the US, the UK, and the rest of Europe, result from the material conditions of existence in Africa since its capture and partition. And I think that's another really critical point, because this system and this society and many of us attempt to portray Africa as, oh, it's sad, it's poor, children, we don't know why, but children are in poverty, they're starving, and if we give $1 a day to some NGO, some nonprofit, then they're going to bring some food to an African somewhere. But we don't know why this happened. And the chairman is saying that there is a material reason for why this is true, because Africa is the richest continent on the planet. It has all the resources. Africa is not poor, the chairman says. Africa is being looted every single day. And that even the wealth of the US and today China and India and all of the emerging capitalist countries are rooted in the resources being stolen from Africa every day. So the chairman is saying that the poverty of Africa and the poverty of African people everywhere is directly related to and comes from the material conditions of existence in Africa since its capture and partition, meaning it was divided up by Europeans into 50-something small states instead of one country which is Africa, just like China is one country. The chairman says, are the Iraqis and Afghans fighting against racism? What about all the people of South America and the Caribbean? Certainly the bourgeois ideology of racism serves to unite the vast majority of whites and even some Africans in support of the imperialist agenda. And you're saying, wow, that unites us with imperialism? So let's talk about that some more. So the chairman is saying that up to now, since the successful rise of imperialism some 500 years ago, Europe and white people have been the subjects of history, and Africans and others have been the objects of imperialist history. Isn't that true? I mean, that's reality. We see the world through our eyes, and we have an amazing tendency to generalize that, our experience, to Africans and oppressed people everywhere. We're always assuming what they think and how they see the world, and we're determining issues that are the critical issues that we're talking about, whether Occupy Wall Street or student loans or even the question of the environment that denies the fact that it has been and is the struggle of African people who see a life and death question in their lives every single day, who are struggling to survive or struggling to be free, who are struggling to feed their children, to keep their children from dying from curable diseases, to have a shelter over their head. This is the reality that African and the majority of the people on the planet Earth face. They're not talking about student loans. They don't give a damn about that. They're talking about the conditions that they are facing as colonized subjects. We are talking about life on the pedestal. We're talking about the life of the colonizer. So we're the subjects of history. We're the first person. We're the narrative. We're what the sorrow is about, what empathy is about. Even, it's even required from colonized people that they would feel sorry for the conditions that white people face, because we put out what we see as the problem, and we demand that the entire world unite with that. Well, what's happening today is that the narrative of African people and oppressed peoples is becoming the major narrative. They are becoming the subjects of their own story. And this is why we see even this mass demand by African people to tear down the Confederate statues that are all over the country. Or we see how cities throughout the US are forced to have, instead of Thanksgiving, Indigenous Peoples Day. That the narrative of the oppression of African and oppressed people is coming to the fore, and what their desires are to be free, to be liberated, to throw off the yoke of the domination of white power that has dominated and oppressed the world with violence and terror, poverty and suffering, rape and pillage for the last 500 years. So Chairman is talking about that, and he is saying that we African people have been voiceless and reduced to invisibility in stature and significance. And he's talking about the fact that Karl Marx, who a lot of white leftists look to as their leader and as their analysis, he's saying that Karl Marx characterized the slavery, rape, pillage, and genocide associated with the emergence of white power and our current status as, quote, primitive accumulation. In another instance, he referred to slavery, the oppression of African people, as an economic category of the greatest significance. So the chairman takes this on because he says, what is primitive accumulation? This dry, cold academic term. It is the lives and the destruction of the society of African people and people around the world. Open our eyes. Let's ourselves join the people on this planet. Let's join humanity. Let's be able to see the world as they see it and come to the same conclusions. Let's stop making peace and you know, and just living a mindless existence on the pedestal of the oppression of everybody else in this system. Let's join the world. Let's get active. Join the African People's Solidarity Committee, the organization under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Join the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Go to uhurusolidarity.org. Join it. Please like our Facebook page, Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel and get notifications. We will be going live, and we do a lot of different kinds of events. We have a webinar actually tonight. You can go to this YouTube page, USM, or you can go to the Uhuru Solidarity Movement's Facebook page. It is Who Are the Real Terrorists? We're talking about the U.S. war against the Middle East and comparing it to the conditions and the U.S. war against African people inside this country. So also we call on you to join and to donate to blackpowerblueprint.org, the incredible programs of the African People's Socialist Party. This one in particular taking place in St. Louis, Missouri today, where members of the party, Deputy Chair Onizine Shatella, under the vision of Chairman Omali Shatella, are buying buildings, are renovating them with the community support, with volunteers, with African contractors, rebuilding the African community of North Philadelphia, which has been abandoned and horribly oppressed and impoverished for as long as it's been there. So go to the Black Power Blueprint Facebook page, go to Black Power Blueprint YouTube page, and subscribe to that as well. So we want to also encourage you to watch Chairman Omali Shatella, and you can find him at hashtag Omali Taught Me. You can go to Omali Shatella's Facebook page every Sunday from 8 to 10 Eastern, and the chairman will be reading himself from the political report, which will be his new book called The Vanguard, that is the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, which will take place in St. Louis October 6th through 12th. It's going to be an incredible gathering of African people from throughout the world, but white people are invited. And I want to call on white people to unite, to study, to look at this, to look at the Uhuru Solidarity Movement videos, to look at our writings, Overturning the Culture of Violence, to see what the role of white people can be, what is the way that really is going to be about changing the world. Uhuru Solidarity Movement is about unity through reparations. It's saying that the stand, if you want to end the oppression of African people, take a stand for raising resources and reparations to the African Revolution. That African people are going to be free, that the people on the planet Earth are going to be free, that nothing proves it more than the Trump administration, that this system is coming down. It's in a serious crisis, and the people on the planet Earth are grabbing and seizing this time to struggle and to fight for liberation and to end this white power system so that all human beings can live with peace, nobody at the expense of everybody else, and that the oppressed people can have their land, their resources, and their culture returned to them. So I want to see you join this movement. Roll up your sleeves, get busy. We have to change the world. Do not leave this for another generation. Fight for unity through reparations. Uhuru.